What's up, Marvel fans? I'm Steven from the Hills Maniacs, and as you know, if you're a fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, they just recently finished up Phase 5 of the MCU with the conclusion of the Ironheart series on Disney+. And now they're moving forward with Phase 6, which will start with the Fantastic Four First Steps movie coming out in a couple of weeks as of this recording. So today I figured for this video I would kind of look back at the other 5 phases that have come and gone and kind of rank them based on the quality of the projects that were involved with each one, you know, the movies and everything, and then of course the Disney Plus shows that were released in the later phases as Marvel started to embrace that new format. But without further delay, let's get started. So starting with number 5, I actually have the most recent phase that just occurred that kind of just ended, which is Phase 5. This one really, there's nothing to write home about necessarily about this phase. I didn't even really know when this phase began, to be honest with you. I thought we were still in Phase 4. Like, I don't remember them ever announcing what the start of Phase 5 was compared to Phase 4 and everything. I didn't even really remember hearing when Phase 4 was kind of ending either. So, like, this one was just kind of thrown in there in a way just to have some movies. And, like, yeah, there weren't a whole lot of movies and shows in this phase because Marvel started to kind of cut back a little bit on the content they were giving us after Phase 4, where they had like show after show after show and they were trying to do all these different things, and it kind of got overwhelming. They at least learned that, but it didn't really work. There were some movies and everything that just didn't really work for fans, a lot of criticisms and everything. Like take Ironheart, for example. A lot of people are really criticizing on that show, which I kind of agree with, honestly. It wasn't that great of a show. Now, at first, you know, going into like Quantumania and everything, you know, I did feel like they were setting up something because they had the whole Kang storyline that they were planning to work on. So, like, Kang being a part of this first movie in that phase, you know, with Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania is kind of chilling in a way. Like, the performance from Jonathan Majors and everything, playing that character, not just in Loki Season 1, when he played a variant of Kang, but then this version of Kang that we saw in Quantumania was kind of scary as well. But then they kind of had to pivot away from that because of the whole Jonathan Majors situation in real life, and that's kind of where things fell apart. And that was here basically in Phase 5. Like, in a way, they're trying to almost fix the pieces of the ship, essentially, like falling apart here. But everything they did in Phase 5 kind of just felt like random projects that weren't really for anything or leading to anything. They're all just their own kind of individual things. Like, yeah, okay, maybe Thunderbolts, I guess, technically is tied into the Fantastic Four because of the post-credits scene and everything. And I guess Captain America Brave New World kind of also referenced the multiverse and that sort of thing. And obviously Sam Wilson will probably be a part of it, but nothing really felt like it stood out or anything in this phase. And compared to like everything else that we've gotten over the years and stuff, there was just nothing really that intriguing about the movies and projects that came out in this phase. And I kind of also wish they had at least had an Avengers movie in these last 2 phases with Phase 4 and Phase 5, you know, which, well, just like all the other phases, at least had one Avengers movie included somewhere within within that phase. But Phase 5 and Phase 4 didn't include that, and I feel like that may have been better maybe to include that, honestly. But Phase 5 just, you know, came and went basically, essentially. Like, now we're onward to Phase 6. It was basically just the, like, okay, let's just get these projects over with and we'll move into Phase 6 and we'll kind of start over in a way. Like, we'll try to do better or something, you know, which, give them credit, you know, they are trying at least. It seems like the next upcoming things are going to be better than what they've done before. But Phase 5 was just honestly a flop for me, and I'm kind of glad it's over with so we can move on to the more important things, essentially, coming up in Phase 6. At number 4, I actually have Phase 1. Now, this is no fault of their own, really. You know, like, obviously this is where Marvel was starting out, so they weren't quite adept at like building this world that they've created within the MCU yet. They were just telling the individual stories of the heroes to get them from point A to point B so that they can interact in the first Avengers movie and everything. So like the storytelling necessarily wasn't that great at the start of it. Like I don't think the first Thor movie was really that exciting of a movie. The first Iron Man was like okay, you know, and everything. The Captain America movie, all that stuff. Even the Hulk was basically retconned from the events that occurred at the time, at least, just because they had to replace the actor that played the Hulk for the new Avengers movie. But like I can't, you know, fault them for trying, because this was the start of the MCU. Like this is what kickstarted everything. But I think what really held it together was that first Avengers movie, and just the excitement of, you know, seeing all those characters that we'd seen in those previous movies coming together to team up for the first time. And that was kind of the first time we'd seen that sort of thing with superheroes teaming up together, at least in live action on the big screen in theaters and everything. But at least it was better than Phase 5 in terms of how they told the story. Like they had a blueprint, they had a format for what they wanted to do for each movie, and while they were all kind of the same in a way, like same versus same, hero versus villain that's similar to them kind of thing, at least that format sort of worked, and at least seemed like a consistent enough story to keep the movie going for 1 to 2 hours, however long each movie was, you know. And you could at least tell through references and through, you know, Nick Fury's appearances or whatever, that they were trying to find a way to connect all these characters together in one shared universe, and that's what made it so unique, this phase. It obviously wasn't the best phase they've done because they were just learning at the time, but they at least gave us something of substance rather than just throwing everything at the wall like they did in Phase 5 and hoping that stuff stuck. Like they at least had a plan, knew what they wanted to do with it, did it anyway, whether or not it was actually going to be any good or be a hit or whatever. Like they had planned, we're going to do this Avengers movie like from the get-go. So they had to just build to that, and it's, you know, and obviously it worked. And, you know, obviously those movies weren't, you know, really the big action-packed things like we've seen later on in the MCU, but they were still nice origin stories for these characters and a nice way to start out the MCU. Now, at number 3, I actually have Phase 2, and the reason I think it's a little better than Phase 1 is just because they did improve on everything that they did in Phase 1. You know, they learned their lessons, you know, sort of, or learned from the mistakes of the past. They improved the characters a lot. They improved the quality of the storytelling a little bit in each of the movies that we saw in that phase. And they even added new characters. You know, this is the first time we see the Guardians of the Galaxy introduced to the MCU. We get to see Wanda Maximoff and Vision introduced to the MCU later on in Age of Ultron. And this was kind of their jumping off point to get us to Phase 3. This is kind of where you start to see the breadcrumbs that they're putting down to show what they're building to with the later movies in Phase 3, like how they're building to Infinity War and everything. This is where they started to plant the seeds for all of that. And you can kind of tell that with each movie you watch, you want to now know how it's connected to the next movie, or how it's going to play out when we get to the next Avengers movie, what these characters are going to do, and so on. And even some of it built off of, not just built to the next Avengers movie, but it built to beyond that as well. So you can kind of see they were laying the groundwork essentially for Phase 3 by using Phase 2. And again, you know, like a lot of the individual hero movies in this phase aren't necessarily important, but at least they were, like I said, improving on what they did storytelling wise in the previous phase. Next up at number 2, I actually have Phase 4. Now, Phase 4, you know, obviously is where they started to do the Disney Plus shows. I was kind of skeptical going into it at first because I was wondering, like, how exactly is Marvel going to make a series of live action shows set within the MCU? Like, how do you do that sort of thing and make it still feel like you're watching a movie in a way? And they kind of, you know, they had some hits and misses and everything because they were first trying this out. It was basically like a second Phase 1 for them. They were almost like restarting the MCU, like this is something new. We're going to try this. We're going to see how it works. And obviously, people criticized that they gave us too much. They gave, like, I think there were like 5 or 6 shows in that same year that it began, along with like 5 movies or so. So that's like a lot of stuff for us as fans to have to watch in order to keep up with everything that's going on. And even some of the shows didn't really connect to anything or tie in with anything, at least not yet, or that I can see, like Moon Knight, for example. I don't see that really tying in with Doomsday or anything just yet, so that might not even tie into anything until like Phase 7. But I think it's that, uniqueness with this new era of Marvel with the Disney Plus shows and everything, I think is what put it at number 2 for me, because it was something new, and we could kind of, while being skeptical, we could also kind of be excited about that and look forward to, like, okay, well, what's the next story going to be? Like, after WandaVision was actually kind of interesting and everything, and the way that they did that and everything, they used that as the format sort of to do all the other Disney Plus shows. They kind of learned as they went along, like, we don't need 9 episodes, we need 6. So a lot of the shows were 6 episodes. Then they kind of went back to 9. They had 8 for some. And then, like, Daredevil Born Again, I think, was like 11 or 12 episodes. So they kind of just, like, improved with each one that they released, even though they kind of filmed them all around at the same time. And I know a lot of it was, like, that they may not have been able to write really good stories or whatever for it, may have had issues with production and everything, because this was around when COVID existed. So they, like, the filming and all that was probably delayed and that kind of stuff for a lot of those projects. But overall, I just thought it all kind of was interesting, like, thinking back to it now, at least, like, maybe the shows not so much, like Falcon and the Winter Soldier, like, I could skip a lot of the stuff in that show that happened, or skip the show entirely. Like, it's just Sam's journey to becoming Captain America. Like, we could have seen that in the new Captain America movie. They could have made that what the movie was about, instead of having Falcon and the Winter Soldier. But at least, like, it gave us something different since we couldn't go to theaters. They at least gave us something to watch within the MCU, so we didn't have to wait like several years to see something else from the MCU. I just thought Phase 4 was kind of fun in a way because of the intrigue surrounding the Disney Plus format. But a lot of the movies in Phase 4 is kind of where the crux of everything was. You had your Spider-Man No Way Home, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, those kind of things, is what really is where, like, the actual good storytelling was, and, like, the almost interwoven story was on the big screen compared to the Disney Plus shows. And the fact that they were able to still take some of the Disney Plus shows and connect them to some of the movies that were coming up, like with, WandaVision tied into Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, the way that they were able to do that as well, I feel like, is what really kept it interesting. And number 1 then, of course, obviously, is Phase 3. This is where I feel like things really just went up a level for Marvel, because now they were really hitting the ground running. They had to build toward Avengers Infinity War. This is obviously where it starts with Captain America Civil War and ends with Avengers Endgame. So, like, everything that happened in that phase had to tie in somehow to Avengers Infinity War and Endgame. So you have the introduction of Peter Parker, Spider-Man in Civil War, and then having his own solo movies with Spider-Man Homecoming. Then they had to introduce Black Panther, so that Wakanda could be used as a location in Infinity War, where they were keeping Vision, so that Thanos couldn't get to the Mind Stone and everything. So all the chess pieces that they had in this phase had to be used and had to all connect, and I think they did a really good job with Phase 3 to get us excited for Infinity War and Endgame, and to build us up to that. This is where the quality really really went up, I feel, in my opinion, and they really succeeded well with telling all the stories, because now every movie that we went to see in that phase, because this was before the Disney Plus shows, so there was none of that, it was just the movies. Every movie in that phase that we saw, we knew was building to something, and we wanted to go see what exactly it was building to, or how exactly they were going to tie it in with the projects that came before it and the ones that were coming up after it. And that was what, I think was the most interesting about Phase 3 was that build to Infinity War and everything, and just the whole aspect of Thanos, or of the last two Avengers movies. And then of course it ended with Spider-Man Far From Home, where we got to kind of see the aftermath of the blip and all that stuff, and like how that affected the overall world of the MCU coming out of Avengers Endgame. I thought all of that was just really well done, and this was like the perfect phase for them to sort of end everything and end that saga in a perfect way. Like if the MCU had ended after Avengers Endgame or something, I think it would have been just fine. We could look back on it fondly, but it was just overall like the most fun, I think, of all the phases too, because we knew it was building to something. We knew that eventually, or we knew that Marvel had a plan. We knew that it was starting to all come together full circle in this phase, and we couldn't wait to see all these characters join forces. And obviously, now we had a bigger assembly of characters than we'd had in the previous two phases before that. So getting to the point of seeing all those characters come together almost brings you back to that Phase 1 where those individual heroes joined forces, but there's a lot more now, so that was even more exciting, I think. And especially with the two Avengers movies and everything, it was just the most iconic, I think, you'll ever see Marvel get. I don't know if they'll ever top themselves from these first three phases, but I don't think there will ever be anything better than Phase 3 for the MCU, unless they find a way to build to it like they did, with the 23 movies and all that leading up to Avengers Infinity War. If they somehow do that again in later phases and they do top that, then, I'll eat my words on that. But Phase 3 was overall just the best that they had. But let me know what you guys think of my ranking down in the comments section. How would you rank the 5 phases that we've seen from the MCU so far? Also, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more. I do plan on covering things in Phase 6 and beyond. I already have a Fantastic Four video that's going to be coming up soon, so keep an eye out for that as well if you're a Marvel fan. Thank you for watching the video, everyone, and I'll see you in the next one.